You gotta join the meeting.
Also from the agenda.
Yeah, that's or from the agenda itself. Depends which browser windows a lot of people want. Okay, just I'll find it. Yeah, if you have a problem, just do this. Thank you. Okay, time. Yep. Good afternoon. Welcome to the PGP OpenPGP working group session.
We are your co-chairs.
Right.
I'm Daniel.
Stephen, still. So I think we have like some kind of status and administrivia and a bit of a report on Interop. So we want to try and get that done in about 15 minutes and then devote the rest of the time to post-quantum wonderfulness. And then if time permits, there's a HKP preview, I guess, or something at the end, if time permits. So Daniel's going to run through the chair slides next.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you need to
are you driving or am I driving?
Well, I can drive from now.
Okay. I'll stand up just for better visibility.
Go right ahead.
Okay. So this is the Note Well. We are on Thursday, so you've probably seen this before, but this tells you. Now we're not at the Note Well. Oh, okay. It's PowerPoint karaoke here. The Note Well tells you what to expect. You're at the IETF. Hopefully you've read this by now. If you haven't, please read it. The next slide is recommendations for hybrid meetings. If you're remote, we want to make sure that you can participate well. And if you can't hear us, please give a shout. We'll be monitoring the Zulip chat as well if you need things said at the room and you can't speak. But please put yourself in the queue even if you're here in person. Next. This is a reminder about treating each other well. Hopefully you've seen this as well. Just to let's keep the conversation simple. Next. This is the agenda Stephen just mentioned. We'll have a little bit of to cover, just to make sure people are aware of what's happened in the crypto refresh since the last meeting. A quick status about the rechartering. And then we'll move to a discussion about post-quantum cryptography. And as Stephen said, in any other business part, we might have a discussion about HKP if we have time. Don't know that we will, but we'll see what we get to. So let's do the crypto refresh. Unless anybody wants to bash the agenda, anybody want to raise any other points, concerns about what's going to transpire here? Not seeing anybody. Can go to the crypto refresh. So there have been 2 drafts released since IETF117 without much concrete substantive change. These are mostly cleanup bits. Thank you to the area director for feedback that helped us do some cleanup, and then a bunch of other folks from the working group have given small edits and review. The editor, Paul, fixed a bunch of the errata in ways that are non-controversial. I'm not going to walk through each of these specific pieces, but this is just a reminder for what's changed. If you've been following the list, if you've been following the draft, you can see those changes. Again, there's not real substantive changes, just mostly cleanup and clarification about what we're trying to do. One particular note for implementers is that there's this upgrade steps appendix now. If you are looking at implementing this and you haven't looked at that upgrade steps, I recommend you take a look. It should make it easier to do the upgrade. Next slide. We have a proposed charter.
On the crypto refresh,
sorry.
Probably just worth saying that the IETF last call was started by our esteemed area director, which is great. And that's ongoing. I can't remember when it finishes. I guess in a week or 2 or something. Yeah, so it's progressing. Sorry.
So yeah, for the rechartering, we had an interim discussion about rechartering specifically. The result is we've got some new charter text, which has been proposed. It's in the GitLab repository. If you have access to these slides, you can click the link to get there. We had a prioritization poll on the mailing list about the range of topics people brought up. People had an opportunity to rank the topics about things that they were interested in and willing to contribute to and to review. And the result of that poll is that we've identified about 4 likely initial topics. The thing that had the most interest from the group was post-quantum cryptography, which is why that's what we'll be talking about here. The new charter has not yet gone through process to be our actual charter, right?
No, I think we have we've offered some text to Roman, and there's some button pushing needed, and I guess it's a busy week for him. So,
Roman, why aren't you prioritizing us over everything else?
Are we reorganizing SEC to get 3 ADs or like split the area? No. So to answer the two questions. So first, the working group last call on OpenPGP ends on the 19th. Just as a process reminder, that's because typically it would be a 2-week last call, but when you have the meeting time is subtracted from the last call kind of time. So it may feel longer than it actually is. So there's still plenty of opportunity to provide feedback. Yes, I have the charter. I want to look at it kind of one more time, and then procedurally, what I will do if I'm kind of comfortable with it is I put it in the data tracker. After that, I schedule it for a telechat. The first telechat we could do that on for initial ISG review is November 30th. That's the next one up, and then it goes to the community, and then it'll come back.
right. And so there may be some tweaks from IESG feedback or other community feedback that happens. I think in the meantime, we're kind of safe to assume that we can go ahead and start PQCing away optimistically.
Absolutely. I mean, again, since we're not adopting any of these drafts, we're just talking and kind of refining them. We're clear to talk about any of those things.
So there is interest in adopting the drafts, and we have a scheduled milestone for November, but I hear you saying November 30th is the earliest that the telechat will happen, and it won't become the new charter until after the telechat, right?
No, it's actually going to take even longer than that.
Right.
So,
I'm saying that's the earliest it could possibly be is the telechat. It has to be longer than that.
No, there's actually 2 telechats.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's initial review, which is the 11th, 30th. That's literally just the next possible kind of date to put something on. Then it goes to IETF, the IETF last call community review. So that's 2 more weeks. And then it has to get put on a telechat after that. So theoretically, if everything went, everyone kind of loved it, it's the soonest would be, I think there's a telechat the 3rd week in December. That would be the soonest it could happen.
So we're not going to adopt any drafts in the working group that are outside of our current charter until that date at the earliest.
That would be best practice to do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Milestone dates are fictional anyway. Don't
all right. Well, maybe we could still maybe adjust these milestone dates to be slightly less implausible, given that scenario.
They're all fiction.
Okay. So right. So the prioritized topics are post-quantum cryptography, the superseded keys draft, which we don't have a draft for, but the superseded keys work, which is an attempt to indicate an upgrade path without having to drop your old keys for backwards compatibility. Persistent secret keys, which I think meant persistent symmetric secret keys. And then WKD or HKP, some sort of network access update. So I think I want to cut over to the interop review of, we have some interop of the version 6 of the stuff in the crypto refresh draft. There's a bunch of implementation. So yeah, Eustace, I think, is going to give a report back on the interop from the refresh.
Right. Hello, I'm Justus. I'm working on Sequoia PGP. This is actually my first in-person IETF, and I'm having a blast. So next slide, please. So we've been doing interop testing for 4 years now, and we have around 130 tests. And every time I run the test suite, I feed around 1K5 vectors into the implementations. The way we do that is we have an abstract kind of common interface to OpenPGP implementations nowadays. It's called SOP, and we are also trying to standardize that in the IETF. It has been very successful and a lot of fun finding bugs. And we do nowadays have V6 specific tests. So we have the test vectors from our upcoming draft or upcoming standard. And we also ask implementations to generate V6 keys. Some of them do that and support that. And all of that is done in the main test suite already, and you can find that. And if there's a little search bar, if you type in V6, it will show you the V6 specific results. Or there's a different result where I only include the V6 specific tests. And there I also include, work in progress implementations. And next slide, please. At IETF 116, where I gave this kind of talk, I had to present you with this depressing graphic where, we only saw Bouncy Castle implementing Argon 2. Next slide, please. And now I'm very happy to show you this kind of graph where we see all major OpenPGP implementations other than GNU-PG implementing at least partially V6. And I think this shows a very successful, work in progress implementation status. Next slide, please. And if you want to join the fun, as always, suggest tests, get in touch, review tests, chip in with test suite development. And if you do happen to implement in PGP implementations, please do implement SOP and keep it up to date. Tell me how to get it. Tell me how to keep it up to date. And, there is the SOP -- profile feature, which is kind of new, which is important for me to tell your implementation to actually implement or generate V6 artifacts. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Justice on IDROP or SOP or? No?
Thanks.
Great. Thank you.
If you can put the chair slides back.
I can indeed.
Okay. So next up, we're going to talk about the post-quantum crypto proposal. And I just wanted to preview these questions for the working group to think. The discussion here is going to look at a draft that we have version 3 of that Aaron and Falco and other folks have looked at and done some implementation work for. So the questions for the working group to think about are, well, first off, I want to make sure people have read it. Where are we, how are we doing along the implementation? When you're looking at the draft, think about whether the algorithms that are there are the things that you think we should have. Are they parameterized sensibly? Do we need all the schemes that are there? And do we want to proceed with a single draft, or we want to break them out in separate drafts? Think about the wire formats. Think about the binding, whether this needs to be bound to V6 or V4. These are questions that I think the working group needs to think about, and you may come up with other ones. So that's just a preview of the things that I think you should be thinking, and I think I'm going to move to the presentation.
Want that side?
We'll look at the sub milestones for it.
Okay, so we're going to come back to this one.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. We can come back to these questions after the presentation, or just raise them here.
So
yeah.
We already have a question. Is that fast?
Do you have a fancy new title in front of your name?
Yes, I do have a new fancy title now. Thank you. So this was also happened to be my master thesis, like part of it, like the draft 1 version of this, and it went through. So yeah, thank you. Now we have a brief update about what has changed in the last version since version 2, and also we have a formal request for adoption of the post-quantum draft. Can next slide, please?
Sure.
Okay. Next. So this is where you can find the draft in case you're interested to read it, to give the feedback, and to answer to DKG's questions that I think are very, very well posed. Next slide. Yep, next. Okay, so this, you might have already seen it, is pretty much the same slide since a few IETFs. And what we have right now is these 14 code points where we have a Kyber and lithium that is now called MLChem and MLDSA. hybrid with curves. Some curves, like the mask curves and the should, are the ones from the CFRG, and the others are for compliance. And finally, we have a Sphinx Plus that is now SLH DSA as should, implemented with two different underlying hashes. Next slide. The Sphinx Plus is further parameterized, with 6 different parameters for each version, going from the slowest to the most compact to the fastest, as well as having like the 3 different security levels. Next slide. And next slide. Okay. So as of now, we have the following bindings. For signatures, we require to have these 6 keys and the 6 signature packets. And the reason is that they not only they implement the salt that is required to maintain the same security level, like the V6 signatures have a prefix salt that depends on the hashing algorithm. And that ensures that we need a lower security guarantee on the hash function, as much as Sphinx Plus also internally does. This is not the only reason. I personally think that there's also the reason that if someone implements V6, if someone implements post-quantum, they will also have implemented the latest version of the draft, and therefore we're not adding additional burden. Instead, when it comes to encryption, since it's more urgent, at least we deem it more urgent, what we thought is to relax this requirement also to P4 keys. So we do not allow older keys to work with post-quantum, but you can already use V3 PKSKs. We use this since they do not include the algorithm, the cipher algorithm ID into the V1 SCIPD. What we do is that the V4 key also limits the algorithm to AES as much as the X25519 and X448 is done. In the next slide. Again. Yeah. And this is our, let's say, main point today. What we would like is to ask for adoption of this draft as a single block for a few reasons. First of all, we think that the industry won't like the fact of having 2 different two or more different drafts, one for SLH DSA, one for the lattice space. And the reason is that we want to have a single like compliance point. You say, I am post-quantum compliant, and this is the draft that specifies how to be post-quantum compliant. OpenPGP is slow in adopting drafts generally, in adopting standards generally, and having 2 different transition periods would pretty much require us to, well, work for the next several years in order to get there. Instead, maybe with 1 draft, we might pull it off a little bit quicker in the implementation side, even though this might require more time from the standardization point of view. Then SLH DSA is fairly well understood. We want to standardize it as standalone, as much as also LAMPS seems to be doing. The MLDSA in composite with the traditional algorithms is also recommended from several European countries, several regulators, and we are implementing only the composite version. So there's no kind of attack. I stripped out 1 signature and I use it to verify alone, because the algorithm ID is hashed into the signature itself. So the algorithm ID completely specifies the 2 different algorithms that are used, and the 2 keys cannot be separated. As well as we want to have already right now long-term signatures, even though quantum computer may seem to be still far away, especially for software signing. It might be convenient to start now with this transition. That's it. If you have any question, please, the mic is open.
Can we go back to the?
We have this Can I the queue?
I was just going to propose to go back to the list of open questions for the room, but yeah, if you've got feedback.
I also have a question on this slide.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mike Ellsworth. I'll come up and do the, I guess, mandatory question and then self-answer it maybe. Can you go back to the list of algorithms?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just, for the minutes, for the recording here, I think this obviously needs alignment across all of the TLS, the S-MIME, all of the should make the same choices. I'm giving a talk on Friday at PQIP, which attempts to summarize the state of these alignments across all working groups. One question that's come up this week that should be probably discussed across all working groups is there's no 512 elliptic curves in here. So I think we probably, you and I have talked, and so this is aligned between LAMPS and OpenPGP, but why 256 at level 1 and 3 and then 384? Is a choice I think that's still open, maybe.
So this was a choice that was actually originally we had 512-bit curves, and then or 521, and then this was changed into this version later on. I mean, everything is still open. So like this draft is a personal draft. If the working group decides to adopt it, you'll get to take this decision. Like you can argue about it. The argument we have is that elliptic curves are a fallback here. And we think that this is also the alignment that is given from the NSA, the CNS, how it's called. There's some guideline recommendations from them. They also match them like this.
Oh, there's actually government documents that help with this alignment.
Yeah.
Oh, well, then we should reference them. Yeah, if you can have those, send those links to me, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, it's, how to say, this is, after all, is a decision that different people came up with different matchings. We think that it's mostly, since it's a fallback, having just 384 and 512 is, at least in my opinion, a bit silly, because 256 is probably the one that is the most deployed in hardware and the most available in software already. So excluding 256 would be a bad decision. And between 512 and 384, yeah, it could be the lowest security with 256 and the high security with 512. I don't really have a big preference there. The other question is whether at all we should keep all of these 6 algorithms, as DKG asked before. So maybe we want to limit the compliance to only one algorithm and like to say, okay, one NIST and one brain pool. And at that point, the question is which one, with which dilithium or which Kyber. So all of these questions are still open. You're still welcome to challenge this matching. But so far, the also practical results we had with implementations. And note, we have, as of Sunday, 2 interoperable-ish implementations. And also the measurements I've taken in actual usage, they seem good. So I don't see any problem with this matching.
I'll ask, I have one unrelated question to start.
Oh, but so just on a point you made, I mean, I guess it will be a thing. I think we'll need to confirm with the working group as to, does this working group have the opinion that all working groups should be picking the same things here? Yeah. SSH, for example, is not going to. There's not an SSH working group, but the SSH protocol has made different choices. So that's something we'll have to check. I mean, clearly at some level, libraries or implementations of algorithms will need to have commonality. Some methods will be common. Whether code points across working groups and protocols are common is an open question for now, I think.
And there's a question of whether we're talking about how do you align the 2 pieces of any paired composite, and then there's a question of which paired composites are you actually going to do, right? It could be that LAMP says we want to have 25 oids, and OpenPGP says we actually want 3 oids, and as long as they're from a subset of that one, maybe that's the alignment that you care about. Yeah. So. Sure.
Yeah, I can't imagine TLS using Sphinx Plus, for instance.
Yeah. Okay, but you had another point?
Yeah, so my next unrelated question, I am going to ask the question so it's out in the air, even though I think it's a bad question.
Mhm.
You are not specifying the lattice schemes independently, only in composite.
Yeah.
And I personally agree. I think that's a prudent decision, but it does mean that there's a transition in and then eventually a transition out when we want to move to single algorithms.
Yes.
Maybe eventually in the future.
Correct. So OpenPGP has a huge legacy burden. Like you can't really deprecate things quick and fast. We'd probably stick with being able to parse DSA signatures forever. And therefore, we already have all of these curves in our crypto refresh draft. Is not that by drop, like if tomorrow we come up with a new code point that is Kyber 1024 only, we can do it. It's going to be, it can be another draft in 5 years from now, in 10 years from now. And at the same time, the brain pool curve will already be there in implementation. So that does not add complex, like a huge burden.
Sure. But I guess the transition out part depends on, you know, a quantum computer actually existing, kind of.
Yeah.
And also
until that's clear, why would you take away the?
And also whether dilithium is even still the single winner. Maybe by then we'll have the on-ramp stuff. I mean, who knows what we want to transition out onto.
So I did have one other question for you, Aaron.
Mm-hmm.
So here you have kind of two top level bullets.
Yep.
And I think the draft kind of argues for both essentially.
Yes.
And my question is, do you see a tension between those two top level bullets? Between the quick and simultaneous in this particularly?
So first of all, I think as far as understood, NIST still has to come out with the official draft for this, the official standards for MLCAM, SLHDSA, and all of them. So the thing is, anyway, before approximately 6 months, we won't have these standards. And I can't imagine anyway the OpenPGP committee being faster than 6 months into going into working group last call for this draft, given that we're going to adopt it maybe in December. Regarding instead internal contentions, whether like everyone likes the algorithm we proposed, for sure I see some criticalities for each one of them. So for the stateless hash, whether we want to have a sub-parameterization is, in my opinion, an open question. And if not, how many code points do we want to allocate for that? That is 12, at least in my opinion, are a bit too many. For the elliptic curves, which elliptic curve do we want to use? That's also an open question for both dilithium and Kyber. And as well as whether we want to use, let's say, whether NIST relaxed any binding with Kyber or the latest differences between Kyber, the round 3 submission, and MLChem. Also, it's an open question. And so, like I would say clearly, the draft, a single draft will go as low as the slowest of the 3. But I think anyway, we can't call it victory without having a cam. And I might suspect that to be the slowest here.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, my opinion. Then feel free to join in the queue and disagree with me straight away.
Well, I think we'd probably go back to the set of questions from the chair slides for that discussion. I think that was your plan, DKG.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back to that.
I think you're going to answer the question.
Okay, yeah, then probably I should stay here. So I have read the draft, yes.
Not answer these questions.
Okay.
Whatever people will
Yeah,
propose things here.
So I mean, who has had a read of this draft? Not necessarily the 03 version, which is quite fresh, but who has read this draft relatively recently? Okay, so we only have a few, 2.5 hands up somehow. Okay. Okay, so there's more. There's clearly that will have to change, but nonetheless, let's knowing that we have some implementation. Yeah. Should we take those slides now? Or?
The implementations we have.
There was a slide on that, though, right?
Yeah, Justus has a slide.
Oh yeah.
I'd like to report back.
All right, it's me again, Justus. On Sunday, we embarked on a bold mission to create a V6 post-quantum safe certificate and sent a message. And the implementations that we used or tried to use were OpenPGP.js, GOpenPGP, and RNP. And after some fiddling, we managed to use GOpenPGP and RNP to create a V6 key. We were kind of conservative and created a dilithium primary key with the Chi by encryption subkey in composite, of course. And then in the end, we were successfully encrypting and signing a message, and we sent it over SMTP. And this may be the first mail secured by quantum safe algorithms if I only hadn't sent the keg with it. And you can see the message here, and it's a bit on the large side because I decided to sign it as well. Shout out to the team, Daniel Rauchens, Aaron Wüssler, and me, and also to Falco and his team who implemented V6 and PQ support in RMP and Botan as well. Thank you.
Cool. Well done.
Is there one more slide on that?
No, that's it.
That's it. Like all the implementations right now, there's a disclaimer, are using the round 3 submission, are not using yet the NIST proposed standard. And GopenPGP is quite complete. RNP, I think, is also quite complete. The only thing is there's some meddling that needs to be done with V6. So for the last point, maybe require V6 keys. And OpenPGP.js instead is using a slightly older version of dilithium, and therefore is not compatible with the other two, but is more of a library issue than of an implementation issue. Also, that's quite experimental still.
Ask a question from the floor.
Daniel, without any hat.
Yeah, this is Daniel, also with no hats on. So this question about requiring V6 keys, I think, is an interesting one. It's going to change the dynamics of how this stuff flows into the ecosystem, or doesn't. And if I understood your proposal for this, you're saying the signing keys are all requiring V6. There will be no signing capable stuff in V4. And that the encryption keys are V4 or V6. Mm-hmm. And additionally, that the encryption keys will be able to do SEIPD v1 or SEIPD v2.
Yes.
So I think I understand the rationale for that split, except for the last bit. Why do we want to allow SEIPD v1 with the legacy OpenPGP CFB and this weird thing about like, well, it's going to have to be AES because that's what we're binding this stuff to, because there's no place to store it. Like, why don't we just say, if you're going to do post-quantum encryption, you have to also do SEIPD version 2 with OCB?
I would say 2 reasons. First of all, SEIPD v1 is not broken. And the second is that, let's say that I'm sending to 2 recipients an email and I have only a post-quantum key and only a v4 key, legacy, whatever, and then I need to fall back into SEIPD v1. I could send 2 separate emails, sure, but that's not how I would imagine it to work.
Okay, so the CC use case to somebody who can only do SEIPD v1 is the reason. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. That makes sense to me anyway. Maybe other people in the room feel differently.
Okay, so what do you want, people? So I think we want opinions and on what answers to these questions, and that will help us kind of try and figure out if, for example, we need to ask to have some kind of split in the drafts before adoption calls, or what. So I think we need some guidance from the working group. if nobody has guidance, then our mythical milestone of November in the charter becomes possibly a mythical charter. This is the thing that people most want to do, and they don't want to tell us how to do it.
But you can also say everything that's in the draft is exactly how I want it to be. That's a legitimate comment. But we will need feedback from the group, and if that feedback is not forthcoming here, it needs to be on the list. If it's not forthcoming on the list, then we don't really know how to adopt the work. So we will need feedback of some flavor.
Mike,
Adopt.
so you're happy with the whole assembly all in one thing, and that's your preferred thing.
I'm not a PGP implementer, so I can't really comment on whether that's introducing unnecessary complexity to split it or not split it. I don't have an opinion on that question, but I do think this work is obviously in charter, in scope. We should adopt. Oh, okay.
So we'll be in charter. Yeah.
Will be in charter. Okay. You wanted someone to I'll be the one to stand up and say this work should be done in one form or another.
Right. Okay.
Note that, regarding the adoption, I think the biggest question here is rather whether we should adopt everything in a single draft or not, because if then the question is whether we should bind it to V6 keys, or if there's one code point too much and you don't like Sphinx Plus with the SHA-2, that is something that is still up for discussion, and we might just take it off from the draft, as long as the draft itself is what you would like to be working on.
Great. I see people joining the queue. That's excellent. More people welcome. So, Justus.
This is Winter here. So I read the draft and I'm happy with it, and I'm happy to see it adopted as a single document, and we can fiddle with the algorithms later. And I would like to see it adopted. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, Flo Driscoll, NCSC. Yeah, I mean, this work should be done in whatever format the group thinks it should be done in. I won't express an opinion on that. I just wanted to pick up the point there about the need for composite signature schemes. So Mike mentioned earlier we're not going to specify Kyber by itself, which probably makes sense. I think the argument is less clear cut for signatures, whether we want to specify dilithium by itself. So I think that is a discussion that's worth having. If that has an impact on whether the draft gets split, then yeah, I'll let you make the call on that.
So regarding the standardizing dilithium as standalone, I think that I would call that right now is a bit too early to make this call whether we should standardize it as standalone. And in general, from the experimental data we have, the overhead of curves onto that is barely anything. So like X25519 plus, ED25519 plus dilithium 3 is fast. And at least for OpenPGP, that is a mostly asynchronous protocol, having an extra curve in there, both from this artifact size and from the speed, is a reasonable trade-off.
Yeah, and that's completely reasonable call. I think that your security and your cryptography should be as simple as it can be, while still being secure and no simpler. And I guess that given that most of the threat to authentication is from when a quantum computer actually exists. We're making a call now, but we're making a call about a future that's very hard to predict. So you could standardize dilithium by itself now, and then in 5 years' time go, no one should ever use this. To me, it seems worth doing the work, but yeah.
So, AJ, are you on exactly the same topic or something slightly? Okay, so I think this, since we're on this topic, I assume the possibility exists here that you could, in most applications using OpenPGP, you could have two separate signatures, right? Or you might have one signature that's a composite. Now, so I personally don't understand the pros and cons of those two things.
This is an and or kind of question, in my opinion. Like if you have two signatures on the MIME level, let's say, or you just concatenate two signatures into OpenPGP, most implementations will interpret either just the first one and ignore the second, or as an or. So if any of the two verify, then its signature is good. Instead, what we're requiring here is an and is a strict and. This means there's no way for you to split up those signatures and use them individually or anything like that. So is a strict binding. And I think it's, especially if you want to do composite signatures, you should do and.
Well, so I guess the question, I think there's a bunch of questions here that the working group will have to go through. But if you're emitting a signed email or something,
yeah,
you're probably going to also, at least for some time, include a pure ED 25519 signature as well.
Yeah. So you put two signatures on the message level.
So I guess I'm wondering, where's the benefit in having a classic signature and a composite versus a classic and a pure post-quantum?
I could imagine the following advantages. First of all, so the overhead of the classics of the elliptic curve signature is almost negligible. So having into the dilithium signature, having an additional independent and fresh signatures, like two signatures, one of which are made with two different keys. Because if you, in your case, you have one that is made with one key and the other is made with the other key. And it's on the receiving end to choose which one to validate and how to validate them. If they need both, if they need one, then you need two keys to validate both of them. And you need to distribute the keys. Do you want, like, the sender might mean something different from what the recipient actually does.
Sure.
Instead, in this semantics, the sender and the recipient have the same, they understand, they speak the same language. They understand the same thing. So you want both signatures to be validated and you say it explicitly.
Right. But nonetheless, I mean, again, it would help me understand this if there were like a clear kind of application using OpenPGP where you really will get a benefit from the composite in deployments. I'm assuming that a lot of the time, if somebody's sending signed email, they will also include a classical signature for a long time.
So the way I would use it personally, let's say I would probably generate a V4 key, not traditional, a post-quantum V6 key, and probably, yes, sign first with the V4 and then right under with the V6, so that the implementations that are already out there that just parse the first signature will find the V4 signature and just parse that one and be happy.
So I think my point is, I guess that we'll have to the working group will have to kind of work through some of those kind of things, and they make a difference as we go. But Mike, you want to talk on this topic?
Yeah. So Stephen, this exact debate, I think, has its own time slot in PQIP. It's the non-separability stuff is really closely related to this topic. And if we decide that non-separability is valuable, then starting with two independent separate signatures obviously doesn't get you there.
Sure, but I guess my concern is that the question of the value may depend on the protocol that's emitting signatures.
So my opinion is very simply the cost of having non-separability in OpenPGP being asynchronous and slow already, it's negligible. And at this point, I would prefer having non-separability rather than having some, let's say, I would say some fancy kind of non-critical packet into a signature that says these signatures is to be read with this other signature and to be validated alongside it. And that would instead be a much more complex situation than 138 bytes of like extra data or so.
Yeah, I guess I'm less concerned with the performance and more with the semantic, the additional security benefit and the semantics, and it also looks more likely that there will be new signature schemes, right? So picking a composite now might be harder than picking a composite CAM now. Are there other people on this topic, or AJ, you're in queue? So go ahead.
Okay, hi. My name is AJ Stein. So I haven't read the draft, and since this is on record, I guess I'm going to really be worried about this because this is a very simple protocol and series of algorithms and whatnot. I guess I will read the draft after this. More to one of the other points, I don't have much constructive to add, but I know you need people in the group, if this is maybe my first day in this working group in some capacity. Regarding the single draft or broken out somehow, someone in another working group posed the question to people, what are the odds of an implementer implementing just one of the algorithms as a subset? Then you could break out the drafts, but if not, it doesn't stand to reason logically, although making it kind of long to break them out into separate drafts. So maybe that's a consideration. I don't have a dog in this fight, to use the metaphor, but I thought that was worth posing because I thought, oh, that's logical from what I heard somewhere else today. That's it.
Regarding the size point of the draft, I think this draft also not only compared to the other drafts in OpenPGP, but also in general, I would call it a fairly direct draft. And by splitting it up in multiple drafts, we would have like repetition of the same content over and over, and make like two drafts that summed up would be more than a single draft, so, or three even. So I personally think that also we made algorithm must, should, and may. And the thing is, if someone wants to implement just a must, they're free to do so. And yeah.
Mike?
I'm going to make a meta comment for the minutes. We're on the topic of should we split or stay the same. We just got bogged down in signature stuff and not chem stuff. I predict will continue to move at different paces. And if we want the chem stuff, I think then I think this is going to keep happening. Non-separability stuff is not a solved problem.
Yeah, I think there are other working groups talking about these same kind of issues, and they are going at different paces. I think that's a fair comment too.
Yeah, like my conclusion point about the splitting up the drafts is we have probably, most of us has seen a certificate that is 10 years old and is still valid and still being used for encryption and signature. And OpenPGP, this is the speed it has. So if we wait 5 years to release a new draft with dilithium, then we might actually miss the train that gives these people like the option to generate 1.5 years from now already a certificate that is post-quantum resistant. I do not make a comment whether it's a good idea to make an unlimited life certificate and use it for 10 years, but that's the status quo.
Let me ask a question to Proton Mail. As a corporate company, do you want to be post-quantum encrypting your users' content fast? Like, is that valuable, or are you willing to wait for the signature stuff to...
Sorry, which kind of fast do you mean? Like, are you concerned about the efficiency of the algorithm, or do you mean the speed?
Sorry, standards process
speed,
2024, 2026. I mean, yeah, does like, you as a corporate entity, do you have an opinion on getting chems sooner?
So for sure, there's a marketing potential in releasing PQC. I do not think we should rush it to the point where we use unstandardized algorithms to do like, I don't know, like using maybe like releasing it like this month or so, using stuff that is also from NIST and standardized. But personally, I'm also not in the leadership of the company, so I can't really tell you what do they want. It's like, maybe Daniel can comment about this better.
So I'll say we might want to deploy perhaps an experimental or private algorithm before it's standardized and use that internally at Proton if we want to. I mean, the answer is maybe. We might want to deploy something soon, and then I would think that might be the best way to do it, rather than rush the standard through the working group here. And then also, like, if we want to deploy something now, we might want to deploy the round 3 submission version, because that's what there are libraries for, rather than wait for the NIST standards, right? But I don't think we should make a draft here that says to use the round 3 submission. So then I think if we do end up wanting to deploy that, we would need to use an experimental algorithm ID and probably use that only within Proton, I would say.
Yeah. No, that is exactly maybe a clarification about what I was saying before. Is like, I don't think we should squat code points. Like, we just take 35 and deploy it with our post-quantum version, and then everyone else needs to put it as reserved because we've done so.
Okay. Any other input? So I guess clearly that if nobody else is getting to the microphone, can you say something controversial and prompt them to jump to the microphone?
So I'll say something controversial. So there is the sub code points for the SLHDSA. How about that?
Yeah. Do you want a comment?
Yeah. So we have this history in OpenPGP of one code point per algorithm, and then when the elliptic curves came in, we had this OID parameter. So you could do elliptic curves, but you could have OIDs, and then you had a sort of infinite range of possible elliptic curves that you could use. And then in the crypto refresh, we went back to saying, there's a code point per algorithm, and this is ED448, and this code point is ED25519. So the SLHDSA that's in this draft has a sub code point in it.
So the question is whether this is relevant for your security parameterization. So if you want to say, okay, I accept, like my implementation will accept all kind of SLHDSA with SHA-2, okay, and then you're fine with not specifying which one, because the question is like RSA, clearly no one would accept a 512-bit key. And you can go from 0 to infinity pretty much. And instead, SLHDSA, we have 6 parameters, and all of them are, as of now, deemed secure to a different level, but deemed secure. So the question is, are you okay with saying, I will bind forever that all of these 6 parameters will be, I will like consider them as a single algorithm, and I do not care what's under the hood. If I say that SHA-2 is now insecure, I just deprecate the whole algorithm, or I don't accept that algorithm as a whole. Other option is for us to split up these 6, and right now would be 12 new code points. I know we got many, but this is a question for the working group as a whole. Like, do you like those? Do you want to remove the 192 bits because you think they're anyway useless? Do you say, okay, this is SLHDSA is just for code signing, so we don't need the fast variant. We're okay with the slow variant or primary keys, I don't know. So come up with these ideas, propose them. We're happy to hear them. We're happy to renegotiate the fact of having a parameter. I personally, when implementing in OpenPGP the parameters, I felt dirty. So I felt like it was probably not the right thing to do. But from the standardization perspective, it looked great, at least from my perspective. And from the implementation perspective, it looks a little bit hacky. You're the implementers, so come to us and tell us, no, don't do it.
Okay, just an additional question then. So with the current draft, is there additional work required to specify, let's say, how to use this for email or anything else? Or is it all in there?
No, so I don't have any slides about it. But at the summit, the email summit for OpenPGP, back this May, I presented some results, some preliminary results, and pretty much using any of the dilithium or Kyber algorithms is user transparent. So they won't even notice that there's a difference into what they're doing. They're just going to be slightly larger artifacts, and that's pretty much it. Sphinx Plus may require some additional thinking, as if like you might actually rethink the UX if it takes 3 seconds to sign, so you can just click on send email and then wait there for 3 seconds with the user closing the tab because they're like, what is this even taking 3 seconds for? But I would not recommend the use of Sphinx Plus for email signing anyway.
So
basically, the answer is transparent, at least from the usage that I imagine of it.
So even if you're signing the email once classically and once with a combined signature, there's no email, there's no additional specification required for email.
This comes to the second topic in my opinion, of the rechartering, that is this kind of transition to the new certificate without deprecation. That might be an interesting point. As far as I understood the RFC right now, it is that signatures on the message level are to be interpreted as an or. So if any of them. So I would say that is already sufficient. There might be some guidance needed to the developer to tell them, hey, put first the encryption, the legacy one.
Does any mail user agent emit multiple signatures today? I don't know.
A few only understand the first one. Some others parse all of them.
Well, I think Stephen's question was about emitting multiple signatures as opposed to.
That's actually already in the draft. If you scroll
No,
down,
do existing mail user agents emit multiple classic signatures ever today?
I've seen messages with multiple signatures. I don't think by default they do.
I haven't seen it.
I don't think any of them do by default.
Sure.
I mean, there probably is some cobbled together thing that does that,
Right.
that's capable of doing it. But yeah, but that may be something that we need to bubble out into. And actually, I don't know how. Mike, maybe you can speak to the SMIME situation. Are there any SMIME clients that will sign with multiple signing keys concurrently?
I mean,
for a single message?
I have a note that is in OpenPGP, we have the nested signatures already. So we do already include the option of signing the thing and then signing it again.
Yeah, the mechanism's there.
Yeah. Whether we use it is.
Yeah.
Mike Ellsworth, I can speak wildly non-authoritatively. I don't think I've ever heard of an SMIME example that does that. PDF signing does that. Code signing does that.
Code signing.
Sorry? JSON signature? Sorry. Judy, you want to consider?
Please come
to the mic, Grace.
Hi all, so Julien Prat from CryptoNext. Yes, there is also this mechanism in JSON Web Signature where you can store as many signatures as you want. And then it helps providing retrocompatibility, for instance.
And
so
is that actually used? I mean, in OpenPGP, you can make a list of signatures. The question is, are there tools that people use that actively do that right now?
So far, I'm not sure, but maybe it can be useful for transition. So it will, at some point, it will be maybe.
Right. So the mechanism is there, you're saying, but you haven't seen tooling that does it.
No.
Okay.
So Jonathan,
So I can speak to Windows code signing did that for RSA to or SHA-1 to SHA-2 used multiple signatures. I think EIDAS uses them pretty extensively for layering and countersigning and stuff, right? Like those are the examples I'm aware of.
Okay.
EIDAS is our favorite thing this week.
Jonathan Hamill, RC 5752 specifies how to do multiple signatures for SMIME. I'm not sure how widely implemented it is, but.
Okay, great. AJ?
Hi, AJ Stein. I'm not going to speak to from an expert perspective on different tools, but I can tell you from personal experience, in the US federal government, there's a very popular email client, or I'm sorry, a mail user agent that does SMIME, and I would be very impressed to find out if it could actually do multiple signatures. It's pretty much limited to one by design because people have to use cards that identify them as people. It would be almost impossible for you to ask someone, let alone actually have someone approve you getting some free-for-all thing. Again, this is for MUA, but not for code signing, which is like totally different. But I'm going to be very surprised if the biggest mail client people use for that kind of stuff, which is very consistent, supports it. That's it.
Thanks.
Justus?
Hi, Justus Winter. So if you do code signing using Git and GNU-PG, it will emit one signature. And I'm pretty sure that when verifying signatures on a commit, Git will reject the signature, or Git will reject will fail the verification if there are two signatures.
Okay, so I think from that there are some kind of application layer considerations to whether they result in more specification work needed or not. I don't know. So we kind of, that's a thing that the working group will have to try and figure out. Yeah.
Note that in the draft itself, there is a paragraph about email transition, and that where we talk explicitly about this problem in SMIME and emails in general. Like, sorry, not SMIME, in PGP, MIME email, and this kind of stuff. So what I would consider also there, this paragraph might be split off from the main specification and made it into an informational RFC or something like this.
Right. Yeah. So I guess we need to figure out, is there anything normative or just kind of guidance needed for applications that will be using, composite chems or signatures or whatever.
Given the zoo of answers we had, probably the answer is yes.
I suspect some guidance might be useful because, like Justice was saying, if there are applications out there that will barf on a second signature already, then
well,
sending them at least a signal.
This guidance may be relevant not just for post-quantum, but for V6 keys.
That's quite possible,
which suggests that the fact that we have the key superseded work queued up as a milestone, maybe that's the place for that kind of.
Exactly.
Sorry, in the list of milestones that we were talking about, PQC is the first one, and the second one was this key superseded work.
Okay.
Which is an attempt to say, here's how you indicate that you have two certificates. One that people might not have as wide support, and one that's probably known to be slightly weaker that has wider support.
Sure.
And that might be the place to put that kind of guidance.
Okay. Well, I was trying to think. I'm guessing from this discussion, and we clearly need to have these discussions on the list. I think so I think there's an additional question to what's on here that we need to ask the working group is there something normative needed because of this post-quantum stuff, or does that fold into the key supersede work or not? And I guess we probably need people to think through some of the consequences of adding these new code points and how that impacts on applications, if it does.
Even though I think that the biggest step is V4 to V6 rather than pre-quantum to post-quantum, because if an implementation completely chokes on a V6 signature, then we have a bigger issue than post-quantum.
Sure. Okay. All right. Can you say something else controversial?
No,
it seems to eventually prompt them to jump up to the microphone.
Isn't there like another slide with some controversial questions?
There's the sub-milestones. Just thinking about what we might need in order to actually do this work. Okay, we would need to call for adoption, but we can't do that until the IESG has sorted out the charter.
Well, but I think we also need to kind of try and flesh out a couple of questions first, right? So there's, if we're going to call for adoption, we need a draft. It could be this draft, or if the working group wants to split the work into multiple chunks, then the authors would need to do that.
Yeah.
So I think we need to, before having a call for adoption, we need to kind of try and figure out, does the working group want to have multiple drafts on PQC, or are they happy with the way it is now with just a single draft that tries to cover all the things?
Yep.
And then I think also that question about whether, is there additional normative or guidance text needed to make it sensible to adopt a draft on PQC?
Right.
Or whether we should shift that to the other topic,
Well, I think the first question is there additional specification or guidance needed because of PQC?
Okay, yeah.
And if the answer is no, then that's it. If the answer is yes, then we can think about how to position that with V6 kind of transition.
About test vectors, I might actually give some, we do have an issue in our GitHub where we posted some test vectors that are as of now broken, but we're fixing them. We plan on putting also test vectors in the draft itself. And we don't expect the working group to just standardize a draft without test vectors. And as well as the interrupt test suite, interoperability testing, we plan on using the interrupt test suite and specifying a profile for the various levels of the draft. And well, at least with the implementations that do implement PQC, try to generate certificates and consume them and use the test vectors provided.
Okay, so I think, given we don't have loads of people jumping up, I think the right thing to do here is to ask, come up with a few questions to ask the list. Yeah. Is there a functional kind of split better or needed? Is there additional specification or guidance needed? I don't think we need to discuss code points and algorithm choices until after adoption, probably.
I think that's right.
So I think there's only those two questions that would help the authors decide if they want to propose exactly this draft for adoption, or if it needs a bit of work for us to split it into two or something. And if there's additional work needed, we try and hunt down some volunteers, I guess.
I guess the authors are also happy to speaking as one of them to cut, like if there's a working group necessity or like requirement to split it up somehow or to remove the guidance from this draft and put it somewhere else.
Yeah,
we can talk about this.
Okay, so I think the action is probably on the chairs to start a couple of threads on the mailing list on those topics, 2 or 3 topics in the next couple of weeks. And then hopefully that'll align with the rechartering so that we can do a call for, so that we have a draft ready to be the subject of a call for adoption once the new charter is out. Does that sound reasonable? Does any other post-quantumness that people want to discuss? We have a bit. We're not pressed for time today, so that's we have a couple of minutes if people have other things. We're doing fine for time. If not, I think we might revert back. Roman had a couple of comments on the charter, so we might revert back to that. If that's okay. I can. I have to do a screen share, but I have it on a tab.
I thought in the interest of time, since we had it, I could ask a couple of questions of the working group on observations I made about the charter. I think these are largely editorial, but I want to make sure they are because I think we need to remove a little bit of text. So this is purely editorial. OpenPGP is not an internet standard, like it's PS, so I will change that. I will ask I really loved, by the way, that we included references to
PS is proposed standard for folks who don't know all the algorithms.
Sure.
Sorry, just
You're precisely right. Thank you for clarifying that. I really love that the working group included links to mailing lists or GitHub issues to clarify what's meant by the topic. I'm going to check whether the ISG is going to balk at all sorts of kind of clarifying kind of references. I would love to leave it in. So if that disappears, that's why. And then really the question I really want to talk about is the working group process. If we could scroll down to the section that says working group process. Because the work is great. I have no issues with how we scoped it. So I posit that I would love to remove the first paragraph. That's how everyone does it in the IETF. And I think by having it there raises questions like, what are you trying to do that's different? And the answer is, I think nothing.
Correct.
I think that's editorial. Please react if that is not editorial.
I think that there is somewhat of a predilection for more mailing lists here than compared to some other working groups who are more interim meeting driven, and I think that's the history of that text. But it's not. Yeah, I kind of agree with you otherwise.
So the previous charter actually said even more strongly that we would do all the work online and not. It said something like, try not to hold face-to-face meetings or something like that. But then I observed that we had a face-to-face meeting every IETF for like some IETFs in a row. So I kind of changed that text to try to reflect reality as I observed it. But personally, I would be fine with removing it entirely. But if someone has strong opinions that we should do the work primarily online and not in face-to-face meetings, then maybe they should speak up.
Yeah. So I just looked back at the current charter and it does say internet standard.
I know. I actually noticed that too. And I actually double checked. I'm like, did this get upgraded? Who ran the status change process?
And there is very similar text, but I kind of agree. It's not that there's no function to that text other than it's just a bit of virtue signaling.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I think there's, and then, so I think that I think I heard agreement, let's just remove that paragraph because that'll raise kind of questions. And then the next paragraph, I also would like to tune a little bit of the language because I think it adds clarification for what is existing process, and that's attack surface. So for all work items, any content requires both rough consensus on the mail list and demonstration of interop. I'll propose something kind of specific because we're repeating what is actually already required and then we're adding an additional requirement. So I would like to wordsmith that, and not here on the fly, but I'll make a proposal that says something like, we will follow all existing things and above and beyond where we're going to require 2 implementations. I don't want to get into the, like, how are you calling consensus? Because that just raises attack surface. And then we'll make the last milestone, the first milestone, not November 2023, we'll call it January 2024.
Sure. You probably maybe bump them all by.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds great.
And
otherwise,
I don't care how many months you bump them by.
Because it's not.
Because it's fiction.
I'm not going to say that in the mic.
But
Okay.
having the first one, having one by itself first, I think is correct.
Okay. Perfect. Otherwise, that sounds great. I'll drop another data tracker and we'll run the drafts.
Great. Thank you. Okay. So I think it turns out we likely do have time for the if time permits section.
So Jonathan notes in the chat, did we just ask people in the face-to-face meeting to speak up if they object to doing work in face-to-face meetings? And I think that is a legitimate concern. So, so that is probably worth raising on the list and just identifying that, calling that out to say that this is, we are removing this from the charter. Those of you who, have been upset by the fact that we have not been following the previous charter, be aware that we are now more formally not following that previous charter.
Okay, so I think Andrew, are you ready to present or to give it a shot, given that we have time?
Hi. Yes. Do you have the slides?
I do. What I'll do is I'll pop them up here, and then I'll hand you control, if that's okay.
Okay.
Just need to press the right buttons over here. So you should see at the bottom of your screen where you have pluses and minuses and so on.
Yes, I have.
Again,
I have buttons.
Just for context, Andrew, sorry. This was Andrew has this presentation. This is like the 4th planned milestone, so we're previewing a little bit, but I think it's good to get it now that we have time just to get the presentation. So list discussion later can make use of that. So thanks, Andrew, and fire ahead. You have about 15 or so minutes. If that's okay.
I could probably get this done in 5, so it's okay. It's fairly short.
In that case, you have 5.
Okay. Okay. So yes, my name's Andrew Gallagher. I run PGP keys.eu, which is one of the remaining surviving SKS key servers. It runs Hockey Puck. I'm one of the major contributors to Hockey Puck as well. And at this point, this draft has kind of been thrown in at the bottom of the wish list for rechartering, but because it hasn't been discussed maybe so much on the list as the other 3 items, I think it might be useful just to give people a quick overview of what's happening and why it's there. So this is not in any way new work. This is actually a revival of Daphne Shaw's original draft from 20 years ago, which is a terrifying number. The current status of this is I've taken over as editor, and I've made a few changes which I hope are uncontroversial. And these changes are mainly bringing the draft up to modern standard practice as HKP already exists in the wild. So I've added HTTPS, the kind of non-standard URI schemes. And I've mentioned about V3 keys, short IDs, and all the usual stuff, just about bumping the general security floor. Added a couple of the SKS specific endpoints because they exist, they're in use, and even if people don't use them, they shouldn't collide with them. And then a few other things like that are more recent, like cross-site security, HTTP status codes, which we have a much bigger selection of these days, and just cleaned up some terminology and tried to put some kind of logic upon a slightly chaotic design, which wasn't so much designed as grew. So the current draft, which I just published there today, is draft 2. It contains all of this work. So please, there's a link at the end of this. It'll be on the materials. So please have a look and let me know what you think. The outstanding items that we know of that still need to be done in decreasing order of concreteness here. The first one that we absolutely must do because version 6 is imminent is some way of safely providing version 6 keys over HKP. And the proposed solution that I'm leaning towards is a new parameter that by default, if is not supplied, HKP would only serve version 3 or version 4 keys that already exist. And this is basically to maintain the current compatibility status of clients. We know that there are some clients out there that do not gracefully degrade when presented with unknown key versions. And this is here specifically to prevent them being hammered by an unexpected version 6 key being returned that they did not specifically ask for. And this is just belt and braces for backwards compatibility with deployed clients. Another option that was discussed at the recent OpenPGP email summit was anonymity padding. Again, for backwards compatibility, this would have to be at the client's request. So again, it would be something along the lines of a specific parameter that requests padding. The exact format of this padding is still, a matter for discussion, but the fact that we would like to implement this, I think, is fairly well understood. And then one thing that has recently come up on the list, and there was quite a lot of chatter about, was about role separation and how HKP compares and contrasts with WKD. They're both kind of doing key distribution, but in different ways. And one of the ideas that I had was that we should think of key distribution as more along the lines of DNS, where instead of clients specifically looking to get authoritative data directly, because there are a plethora now of disconnected, supposedly authoritative sources of keys, what we would do is we would split the roles so that you or your service provider or some kind of trusted third party would provide a recursive lookup service similar to a recursive DNS server, and then there would be multiple authoritative services out there, some of which would be domain bound, others would be say email verification based, and so on, and that would allow those services to coexist more cleanly and more amicably amongst each other. And just one that I threw in there is authentication. We may wish for HKP servers to limit uploads based on some kind of authentication. That would need a little bit more work, but that one's quite woolly at the moment. So really what I would like to hear from other people is feedback from people who are implementing this. There are a few people had a discussion on the list, mainly server implementers. I'd love to hear more from client implementers about what they expect and what they want from a key distribution mechanism before we can really make any big decisions about the things that were on the previous slide, what future work we actually want to include. We will need to make some kind of update for crypto refresh. I would like to get that done as soon as possible. That is the key version, so that there is some kind of at least agreement that we aren't going to start serving v4 keys the moment that v4 is standardized and implemented because of the compatibility concerns. So yeah, we'd need to decide on which things to include in this draft. Do we want a minimal one that's just basically a refresh of the 20-year-old draft brought up to current status, or do we want to put new functionality into this? And that will depend on feedback from the other implementations. Also, we'd need to tie down some registry requirements because this is an API that's implemented over HTTP, HTTPS. There's actually a bit of a zoo of existing RFCs that we need to make sure that we're compatible with. I have them all open in a load of tabs here on the left-hand side. I can't keep track of them in my own head. There's far, far too many of them. And at some point then, further down the line, perhaps next year, according to the draft charter, we could think about adoption, but it's not anywhere near that kind of state yet. So just quickly, the references that I mentioned, the draft is in the usual sort of place in the data tracker, and there's a repo on GitLab. You can see that there. That repo contains 3 documents, the first one of which is the current version of the internet draft. And then I also have 2 discussion documents, one of which is a conformal padding document that came out of some discussions again, like I said, about the last Open PGP email summit, about what exactly we want to do about padding and how to make sure that it's consistent across implementations. Because again, because there are many different implementations of different key stores, and because people tend to refresh keys from multiple key stores, there's a possibility that if a consistent padding isn't applied to all the key stores, then that will itself leak some kind of size data. I call it conformal padding because it attempts to define a padding scheme that preserves anonymity classes across armoring, de-armoring round trips and new line mangling round trips. I hope it does that, but please, if you have a look, and if people who are more experienced in padding than me, please let me know what you think about it. And the third document is just a summary about the discussion that we recently had on the list, what I think is the current state of that discussion, but I'm open for correction. It's basically a list of the various serve versus well-known mechanisms, or HKP versus WKD mechanisms that we may wish to implement, and things that potential clashes that we would want to avoid, and ways that the different schemes can play nice with each other. So that is me. Thank you very much. And any comments or questions, please let me know.
Great, thanks, Andrew. Questions for Andrew or about this topic?
Justus, you're in the queue.
Andrew, thanks.
Hi,
First thanks for picking up the Slack. I think this is important work. Regarding the version selection, I don't like that for two reasons. First, my opinion is if your client can't handle v6 keys, it can't even ignore v6 keys, let them break, because this is the only way we will get to know of the potential problems. Second, we will have the exact same problem with PQ. This is already on the horizon. Will we then have another parameter saying, if you have a PQ key, serve the PQ key? And I don't think that is a good model or sustainable. So I would like to see you serve all the versions that you know of for the given query, and let the client select the keys it understands. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Justus. Yes, yeah, and this kind of goes back to a discussion that Justus and Bart and myself had at the Open PGP email summit. And yeah, we couldn't come to an agreement then, and it's still it's still an open issue now. I'm very sympathetic towards Justus's point. If you aren't following the current standards, it's quite reasonable to not go out of your way to play nice, to make existing broken implementations continue to work. That is, I think that is something that we'll have to agree as a working group. I'm not willing to definitively say one way or the other myself. I'm erring on the side of caution here in this, but I am absolutely open to everybody else's opinion here. But thank you, Justus.
Aaron's going to the mic.
Hi.
Hi.
Aaron. Well, first of all, I understand the point of being, let's say, nice to the existing broken implementations. I think that's a very fair thing. And we might say, okay, if you state that you understand version 6 keys, then you also accept a PQ key that you know that you want to understand. So like, or the other option is to have a different kind of parameter that is like supported features. And then you say, I support the feature v6, I support the feature PQ, and then you just make a list of things you wish. I do not know whether this is a right approach, but also this is also an approach that can be chosen once this draft is adopted or once this is even chartered at this point, I would say. Like,
yeah. Great, thanks. I guess that's just a comment. DKG is going to the room mic, so he doesn't look chair-like.
Yeah, this is Daniel, not as a chair, but just as a implementer and interested person in the ecosystem. It seems to me that you could maybe split the difference here and just have one option that says, I promise I'm willing to ignore things I don't understand. So it's a single option, not a feature set. And if the client says that, then you can put whatever you want on them. And if they don't say that, then you just do the classic stuff. If you have that arrangement, then in some sense, what you're really talking about is an HKP v2. And then the client that can handle whatever they want, they do HKP v2, and HKP v2 says you're allowed to send things that you know that the client might not understand, and they have to ignore it. So it's worth thinking about how far we want to go down that kind of route. I feel like this feature by feature bit ends up with a separate set of traceability and identifiability concerns on a protocol that you really don't necessarily want to tie back to individual clients when they're doing the retrieval. So yeah, thank you for doing this work. I will read the different documents that you've got in this repo and try to provide comments on them too.
Great.
Thanks.
I guess you could, in the limit, you could even start greasing, right? So yeah, I mean, there's been a good bit of discussion on this topic on the list and related topics, and I think that's fine. It's not getting in the way of anything, and so I encourage people to keep discussing, and we'll get to this in terms of adoption, hopefully in the time frame we said. And I hope, Andrew, it sounds like that time frame seems okay for you if it turns into something approximating reality.
I think it's okay. I don't see this as being particularly heavy work. I think like Daphne did most of the heavy lifting 20 years ago. I'm just tidying up the loose ends here. So I'm happy enough to go as fast as the group is happy to go.
Great, and again, thanks for doing the work. I don't see anybody else in the queue, so thank you. I shall revoke your permissions.
Thank you.
And I think we're at the any other business part of the agenda. So if somebody has other business, you've got a couple of minutes. I don't see anybody having other business. So in that case, thank you, and we'll proceed on the list as planned. And thanks to our note takers.
And thanks to Roman for the edu review.
Great.
I just want to say thanks. I was just about to miss the charter and the data charter. Markdown rendering thing.
Oh yeah.
What? I thought I fixed the markdown rendering.
No, markdown render's fine. Render's not data track. So I'm trying to get a little guidance on why we did not render correctly.
Yeah, I mean, if we do some links or something, it's fine.
I would like to not lose the.
Yeah, me too.
So this is why I'm going to ask one more round trip. In other words, I have a text stage for the sandbox now, and so I'll move it from the sandbox.
Great.
If the markdown is good, otherwise I'll scribble it. So,
Okay.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I should just ask.
Great.
All right.
I find it hard to believe there won't be any new specification requirements for saying how to use post-quantum with applications.
I actually think that at the level of, so those requirements I think are going to be the same as using V6 keys with the applications, because the semantics of OpenPGP as described in the sort of SOP layer semantics, I don't think they care about those.
We're still on the recording.
I know.
Guess, but
I know.
that's
No,
fine.
this is.
Yeah, it seems kind of slightly optimistic, but I can just.